presenting Reality Detached, the Science Behind Creativity this afternoon. I've known Will for several years now. He's got 27 years experience in the advertising business at creative hotshops like Goodby Silverstein, Wyden & Kennedy, Arnold, and Mullen. He's a frequent contributor for Forbes, writing about creativity and modern branding since 2011. And Will is also the founder and CEO of Ideasicle, which was established in 2010. Ideasicle is a marketing ideas company pioneering the expert sourcing model of ideation. Will, it's truly a pleasure to have you with us here today. I always enjoy when you're able to be with us, so thank you for your time here. This is a great topic.
And partners as an account guy that people were either creative or they were not creative, and it was sort of a black and white issue. And as you can imagine, walking down those particular halls, there was you know, the talent levels were in graphic relief. But I've been studying creativity for many years now, particularly since I started Ideasicle, when it was really in my interest to understand what makes people more creative, because that was the product that we're creating. So I've done a lot of research, and I'm particularly interested in scientific studies that have to do with creativity, and I always consume them, always. In any individual. It's something that can change from hour to hour, from day to day, from person to person, of course, but you can increase your own creativity. And that's the great hope, I think, that I hope to leave you with. You know, the convention in science up until, you know, probably 5, 10 years ago was that creativity in the brain was merely a right brain, left brain thing, right? That left-brained individuals were more analytical, right-brained more creative. And what science has discovered is that it's a little more complex than that. Yeah, there is a center of gravity for analytics on the left side and creativity on the right, but the brain really is a little bit more holistic as it relates to creativity. The way I'm learning that I believe we should start thinking about creativity is more behavioral, you know. So instead of it being the mechanics of the brain, left and right, it's more the behavior of us as individuals, specifically on one extreme when we're focusing, and on the other extreme when we're creating. And there's a little thing called working memory that you may remember from Psychology 101 in college that is defined as follows: the brain power that helps us keep what we want in our minds and what we don't want out. This is the key to all of these creative studies I'm going to share with you, because working memory, while it's wonderful for focusing, is absolutely awful for creativity. And it's because it is keeping things out of your mind, right? Inherent in focusing is that you're weeding out the noise. Well, the fact is creativity requires noise. If you think about it, it requires lots of different thoughts going on in your brain, and it requires that two seemingly unrelated thoughts collide and then create a new idea. So you know, if focusing then is about attaching to the reality right in front of you, creativity is about detaching from that same reality. And if you think about it, it's impossible to focus on what doesn't exist. Right? So the whole concept of focusing is at utter odds with creativity. Sian Baylock, I actually had her on a podcast a couple of years ago talking about this book, Choke. It's just fascinating, and I highly recommend it. Put it this way. Simply put, people's ability to think about information in new and unusual ways can actually be hampered when they wield too much brain power. And that's the working memory at play. I mean, what is thinking about information in new and unusual ways, but effectively the definition of creativity? So let's pick this apart a little bit. Let's talk about what is required for focusing and then contrast that with what's required for creating. So to focus, you need strong working memory. You need it to be alert. You need it to be refreshed. You need energy behind it. You need high alertness to what's right in front of you. Focus is about what is right in front of you. You need to be very attached to the moment, very in the present. And it's about the ability to filter out noise, you know, and this is great. It's not that focus is bad. Focus is great for doing taxes. It's great for disarming a bomb. It's great for assembling annoying IKEA furniture. You certainly need to focus to do those things. It doesn't require creativity. But when you do want to be creative, focus gets right in the way. For creativity, you almost want weak working memory. And I'm going to show you some studies that almost trick you into occupying our working memory so that we can liberate our thinking. It requires low alertness to what's right in front of you. Creativity isn't about what exists. Creativity is about what doesn't exist. So anything that's right in front of you is only reminding you and tying you to what already exists. To be creative, it's about being detached from the moment. You know, almost in a state of daydreaming, and I'm going to talk about daydreaming. You'd be amazed at how often we do it. Creativity is an inability to filter out noise, whether that's something contrived that makes it more difficult for you to filter out noise, and I'll share with you a number of studies that do that, or just something that's built into your, you know, behavioral mechanism, your brain, you know, in the concept of ADD, for example, which I'll talk about in a minute. Creativity is great for problem solving, things like musical composition, advertising creative, which I'm sure you're all connected with in some way. But it's the diametric opposition of focus and creativity that I think gives us an interesting insight into how we can improve ours. So my theory with all of this and with all of these studies is that our ability to create is proportionate to our ability to detach. Put another way, the more we focus, the less we're able to be creative. The more we're being creative, the less necessarily that we're focusing. Okay? So I'm going to share with you a number of studies, as I mentioned, and a lot of them use some form of creativity test. And one of the more famous ones is called the brick test. Maybe you've heard of this. But it's basically they hand a brick to the subjects and simply ask them to come up with as many different uses and applications for that brick as they possibly can in a given time period. And then they'll change the conditions around which different subjects do this task. And that's where it gets interesting. You know, how well do they perform? So in most of these studies, they don't all use the brick test, but they use some form of that, maybe with ping pong balls or word association or whatever. I'm not going to dwell too much on the actual tests themselves. I'm more interested in how they changed the surroundings and manipulated the variables to come up with their conclusions. But just know that they're all something like the brick test. Okay, so let's get into this. Daydreaming. 46.9% of the time that we're awake, we're daydreaming. Harvard psychologists Daniel Gilbert and Matthew Killingsworth did a study with an iPhone app that contacted 2,200 volunteers at random intervals throughout the day over a few days. And all it did is ask them, what are you doing right now? So you get this little bug from your iPhone that says, what are you doing? And what they found out is almost half the time people are daydreaming. So that's just an interesting fact, but how useful is it? Well, it turns out that not all daydreaming is equally productive when it comes to creativity. The Schooler lab at UC Santa Barbara proved this fact. And what they found is that it's important to maintain a touch of meta-awareness in order to make daydreaming useful. And what does that mean? Well, things like when you're doing the dishes, or you're gardening, or you're in the shower. That's my personal favorite. My ideas almost always happen in the shower. Or maybe for you it's running or something like that. Whatever it is, it's some kind of menial task where your mind can wander, and it tends to, because it doesn't require a ton of focus, right, to wash the dishes or do the gardening or wash your hair. But what is happening, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that by doing these menial tasks, you are occupying your working memory. You're giving it a task to do. And while it's doing that task, it is not filtering out all the noise in your brain or your mind, however you want to think about it. As a result, your mind is liberated. You have more thoughts going on because your working memory isn't busy filtering things out. Really interesting stuff. Even more profound, it turns out that walking, just walking, increases creativity by a whopping 60%. Marilee Apezzo, Stanford doctoral graduate in educational psychology, and Daniel Schwartz, a professor at Stanford Graduate School of Education, did a study where they isolated the variables in 6 different ways. They had people walking outside, people walking inside. They had people sitting outside, sitting inside. And even just to isolate the variable of movement, they had people in wheelchairs getting pushed outside and pushed inside. And they had them all do a creativity task while they were doing that. And it turns out the act of walking increases creativity, meaning more ideas, better ideas, by 60%. The color green improves creativity. This is from the University of Munich. The color green has been proven to be what they call an implicit affective cue. And what that means is basically a stimulus, in this case the color green, that elicits a behavior, in this case better creativity, without any conscious awareness that it's doing so. So here's how they did this. Very interesting study. It was an online study where the creativity test that was online was identical across all subjects. The only thing they changed, the only thing, was what color the opening screen was before the people started doing the test. So for some it was green like this, for others it was red, blue, yellow, black, brown, on down the line. That was the only thing that was different. Of course, the subjects had no idea that the researchers were testing color, because all they saw was, okay, there's a green screen right before I start my test. There was no conscious knowledge of it, and that's why it's an implicit affective cue. Well, it turns out that people who were looking at green just before doing the test had more ideas and better ideas. Isn't that interesting? Just the color green. And interestingly, too, the color red was good for different kinds of things that are related to focus. So green somehow liberates our mind in interesting ways. Now imagine this. What if you put the two together? What if you're walking in green? You know, we think about walking in nature as being an inspiring thing to do, that it's a good place to kind of flush your mental toilet. It's a good way to get inspiration, to be one with nature. And I don't discount any of that. I do believe there could be some kind of cosmic connection to nature when we're doing things like that that could be beneficial to us creatively. But also, look at these 2 studies. Just by walking at all, anywhere, in a mall, it doesn't have to be nature, you could increase your creativity by 60%. Now, walk in nature where you're surrounded by this color green, and you just got to think that it's going to be a double whammy. Another very interesting study, creativity tends to happen at non-optimal times of day. In other words, when you're tired. In a paper published last December in the journal Thinking and Reasoning, psychologist Mary Kay Wyeth did a study and proved that subjects had more and better ideas during their own self-proclaimed non-optimal state. So she recruited by saying, you know, we're looking for people who are great morning people and hit a wall in the afternoon. We're looking for other people who, you know, it's vice versa. You know, they're not great morning people, but they rise to any task in the afternoon. And then she did the creativity test, like a brick test or whatever, and did them at both periods, when they're at their best and when they're at sort of their worst, quote, and I put that in quotation marks. And it turns out when people are tired, they had more and better ideas in the test. And what's happening here, you just got to imagine, is that when you're tired, your whole self is tired, right? Everything is tired, not just a little of you, and that includes your working memory. So as a result, your working memory is less optimized. It's less vigorous. It's less able to filter out the noise and help you to focus. And when you're not focused, what happens? You tend to be more creative because you have more thoughts going on in your mind that can collide and turn into new ideas. Thomas Edison, somehow, even though it's, you know, over 100 years ago, he somehow knew this insight. He did a really interesting thing. It's one of my favorite little moments of any genius, and that is when he was working on an engineering problem that required a creative solution. He would sometimes sit down in a chair, put a fistful of ball bearings in his hand, get a metal bucket, and dangle his hand while sitting in that chair over that metal bucket, and then he would close his eyes and he would start to drift off to sleep as he contemplated the creative problem. And of course, what would happen is his hand would slowly relax as he started to drift off to sleep, and then boom, all of those marbles would hit the bucket and startle him and wake him up, and then he would pick them up and he would do it again, and then he would pick them up and he would do it again, and he would effectively maintain this perfect non-optimal state of creativity by doing this interesting method. And really what was going on, although he didn't have these words for it, is his working memory, he was basically putting it to sleep, almost literally, or keeping it at bay enough where it would liberate his thinking. Love that study. Well, it turns out dim lighting can lead to bright ideas. Anna Steidl of the University of Stuttgart and Lioba Wirth of the University of Hohenheim did a study with 114 German undergrads where they had some kind of a creativity test, right? And they had 3 conditions. One was a dimly lit room, one was a normally lit room, and one was a very bright room. And the results were that those in the dimly lit room solved significantly more problems correctly than those in the brightly lit room. They also felt freer and less inhibited than their intensely illuminated counterparts. Participants in the bright and conventionally lit rooms, it turns out, didn't really differ significantly between each other. It was really, the only significant finding was that when the lights are dim, creativity increases. And if you think about it, it sort of makes sense, and it is tied tangentially to working memory. If the lights are dim, you're less self-conscious. And what is in charge of self-consciousness but working memory? The researchers put it this way: a dimly lit environment elicits a feeling of freedom, self-determination, and reduced inhibition, all of which encourage innovative thinking. And I would just take it one step further. That's all I'm doing. She's absolutely right. I'm just taking it one step further in saying that the dimly lit room is affecting our working memory to the point where it liberates our ideas. Another one of my favorites. In fact, I'm really bummed out that the Mad Men series is over, but I'll get over it. But you know, you saw these guys in the Mad Men era. They would have drinks, you know, whenever anything went wrong. They would have drinks when things went right. But maybe there was something to that, and it turns out that there is a study out on creativity and alcohol that does show that alcohol can enhance creativity. And this was published in Consciousness and Cognition, where people watched a movie while they were asked to complete verbal puzzles. And one group was brought to just below the legal limit of alcohol with vodka and cranberry drinks. So that's, I think it was 0.75 was their blood alcohol level. And the other half were totally sober. And the buzzed guys, the guys who had the drinks, solved more problems in the time period. Out of 20, they solved 9 versus 6 for the people who had nothing to drink, and solved them faster, 30% faster than the sober ones. And on top of that, they had more ideas, and that were judged even better than the sober guys. Interesting, right? But this is a case that's just so you know where I'm going to go with this. The alcohol depresses our entire body, right? But it also depresses our working memory. And as a result of that sort of chemically induced working memory dampening, we are more liberated to think of new ideas. We're less able to focus. More seemingly irrelevant information is allowed into our thought process, and as a result of all of that, our creativity increases. Now, I should tell you that in the same study, they did push the legal limit with another group, and they found that if you drink too much, I'm very sad to say, your creativity will actually decrease. So it's just a couple drinks, literally a couple drinks, can help you with a particular creativity task. Coffee shop noise is another one. This is from the Journal of Consumer Research. They had 300 participants who completed mental exercises like word association games and the brick test, things like that. And they had 3 conditions. They had a completely silent room where they had to complete these tasks. They had a moderately loud room, about 7 decibels, which is roughly the sound of a coffee shop. And then they had an incredibly loud room. And they had the 3 different groups complete the same exact test. And what they found out is that moderate amount of noise, like a coffee shop, is the ideal amount of noise for creativity. And it actually increases your creativity over the silent room and over the incredibly loud room. And it makes sense if you think about it. If the room is silent, you can't help but try to focus on something, right? It's kind of hard to let your mind wander when it's so silent. But with just a little bit of noise, like found in a coffee shop, that's enough to keep your working memory focused on that noise and hearing it and processing it constantly and what's that clink and clank and whatever. So it's just enough to occupy your working memory, but not so much noise that you get totally overwhelmed. To me, this is very interesting because it's like the dimly lit room, right? Only in this case, it's not about what you're seeing, it's about what you're hearing. And just the right amount of noise can actually increase your creativity. I love this quote. If a cluttered desk is a sign of a cluttered mind, of what then is an empty desk a sign? Albert Einstein. There's actually a study that is very similar where there are 2 different conditions, a brick test type thing, and in one room it was absolutely pristine and perfectly put together, very clean and neat. The other room is a total mess, like you're seeing in Einstein's office here. And it turns out the people who were in the messy room came up with more ideas and better ideas, as judged by a panel, than the people in the nice and clean room. It could be, and this is what the study concluded, that disorderly environments seem to inspire breaking free of tradition, which can produce fresh insights. But I wonder if it's deeper than that. That's probably true, but I wonder if messy workspaces basically overwhelm your ability to focus on any one thing. Like your working memory is busy sort of processing the room, and as a result, once again, it's dampened. Its effect is dampened, and now your brain is liberated to come up with more and better ideas. I mentioned ADD earlier, and it's interesting to stop and talk about this. Obviously, this isn't a creativity tip. You either have ADD or you don't. But what's interesting is that people with ADD are more open to creative solutions. They tend to be more creative. And I don't know about you guys, I bet a lot of you have worked in the in-house agency space for a long time, or maybe you worked at an outside agency at some point. And I can tell from my experience that the more creative people tend to be ADD. It's very difficult to get them to focus, but they're so good at what they do. They're so creative in how they can pick apart a problem that we all just kind of live with it, right? Well, it turns out that people with ADD have exactly what I've been talking about in all of these studies so far. They have an inability, their working memory is unable to decide what to focus on and to filter out noise, okay? So as a result of that, everything is important to somebody with ADD. And when everything is important, then there's much more of a chance that seemingly irrelevant ideas and notions can collide in that person's mind and yield new ideas. It's literally an inability to focus, which is the point of this whole presentation, is that when you can't focus, you're more likely to be creative. This one's really cool. You're not even going to believe that this is true, but I encourage you to Google it and check it out. It is actually called psychological distance. And what this is anything that we don't experience as occurring right now, right here, into ourselves, is creating psychological distance. Lyle Gia from Indiana University at Bloomington have proved that if you increase psychological distance, you will increase creativity. With distance, it's easier for people to form surprising connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. So, a couple examples here. One is, they did the creativity test, and for one group of people, they asked them to just do the creativity test. There was no conditions around it, no priming, nothing. The other group, they gave the same exact creativity test to, but they said, now imagine yourself on a beautiful lawn in Paris. And that's all they said. Now go do the creativity test. And what they found out is that the people who manufactured psychological distance for themselves had more and better ideas. Interesting, right? I mean, the other example was time. It doesn't even have to be a physical thing. It's not physical distance. It could be time, where the researcher suggests to the group, now imagine yourself 5 years into the future. Okay, go, do the test. That's all it takes. And you know what's interesting? I don't know if there are any Beatles fans out there. I happen to be a huge fan. But if you think about what happened with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, what did Paul McCartney do with this idea? It was his idea. They'd been touring for years. They were sick and tired of that. They were sick and tired of each other. They were sick of the Beatles, for that matter. And so he came up with this idea that what if we pretended we were a different band? What if we pretended that we were Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and we wrote music that that band would play, not music that we would play? And what is he doing here? But creating psychological distance and giving the band the freedom that comes, creative freedom, that comes with psychological distance. Working memory, if you think about it, is about reality. It's not about projections or fantasies, right? And so when you tell yourself to think about this while in Paris, it basically tells your working memory, don't worry, there's nothing to see here. I'm not in any trouble, there's no issue, just go away. And as a result of just imagining yourself in the future or in Paris or as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, it puts your working memory at bay and liberates you to come up with more and better ideas. Another recent example is formal wear. This is a study from Columbia and California State Universities. And the conclusion of this, I'll just kind of cut to it, is that you can imagine what happened. They had two different conditions. Just come in as you normally would, wearing what you normally would wear. And then another group, they specifically asked to put on formal wear, as you define it, the subjects, and come in and do the creativity test. And what they found is putting on, this is a quote from the study, putting on formal clothes makes us feel powerful. And that changes the basic way we see the world. That's from Abraham Rutchick, an author of the study. I think that's probably true, that we do feel powerful, but I think it improves the way we see ourselves, which dampens self-doubt, judgment, and working memory. You know, when you're feeling great, it's almost like the Superman effect, right? Like if you're wearing the Superman cape and you're feeling awesome about yourself, working memory doesn't need to play that big a role. And when working memory, as you've learned so far, and I've learned, when that thing is put away, when it's subdued, our creativity can increase. I'm going to share with you a study that isn't directly related to creativity, but I think it's about the coolest study I've ever seen, and is related to this concept of paying attention to seemingly irrelevant information. So that's the fiber that ties it back to creativity. This is a wonderful study. Richard Wiseman in the UK put an ad in the paper one day, and he was looking for self-proclaimed lucky people. Okay, so now he's got a group of self-proclaimed lucky people. He, in the next day, put an ad in the paper looking for self-proclaimed unlucky people. So now he's got two groups of self-proclaimed lucky and unlucky people. He gave each of the people in those groups individually, not as a group, but individually, a very simple task to do, and that task was to take this newspaper and count the number of images in it, and I'm going to time you and see how long it takes you to do that. That was the whole task. So he did that, and he tabulated the results, and it turns out the unlucky people took about 3.5 minutes on average to count all the images. And for the lucky people, it took about 10 seconds. And the reason is one piece of information I haven't given you, which is on page The lucky people, on the other hand, were open to irrelevant information, obviously. Because on page 2, we've got in all type, not as an image. They're supposed to be counting images, but they read the headline anyway. And as a result, we're able to complete the task in 10 seconds and not in 3.5 minutes. So think about that. These people are self-proclaimed lucky people. They think of themselves as lucky. Good things happen to them. Well, it could very well be that luck has nothing to do with how life looks at you. It's not some outside force that is depressing you and keeping you down. It's just the opposite. It's how you look at life. And if you are open to seemingly irrelevant information, then you will make connections. And when you make connections, you make progress. When you make progress, you make your own luck. So I share that with you because I think it is related to this, that if you can dampen your working memory, it will certainly improve your creativity, as we've already discussed. But it might actually change your life. You know, good things might start happening to you if you're more open to, quote, seemingly irrelevant things. So back to my theory. Our ability to create is proportionate to our ability to detach. You know, the more we focus, the less we're creating. The more we're creating, the less we're focusing. And in all of these instances, you know, I hope you can find tools that you can try and you can use. You know, for example, if we're trying to detach from, you know, over-focusing, you know, if that's the key, which is the biggie, right? Then it's about not working in non-optimal times of day when you're tired. That's a pretty good time to come up with new ideas. Or in the shower, or taking a walk. You know, those menial tasks that can create just the right amount of meta-awareness. You know, obviously you can't go and be ADD tomorrow, but keeping that in mind, you know, a cluttered desk, a messy desk, maybe you don't clean it up quite so much. Coffee shop noise, and I know from my past experience, creatives working on an assignment love to go to coffee shops or bars or whatever to work because they want to get out of the agency. number one. But number two, it could be that they're tapping into this kind of thing. You know, that little amount of noise is enough to subdue your working memory. Or maybe detaching from inhibitions, you know, that's a big part of this as well. A little bit of alcohol can do that. You know, again, back to the creative teams going to a bar, they're probably having a beer and enjoying the benefits of that perfect amount of noise. Or dim lighting can help us, you know, move away from or dampen our inhibitions. And the color green, who knows? Maybe that has something to do with it too. They didn't really know why it worked, but it does. Or from self-judgment. You know, if you look great and you feel great about yourself, you're less likely to judge yourself. And what's the big force behind self-judgment but working memory? And psychological distance is another great one to remove that self-judgment just by imagining yourself in a different place. Now imagine this, though. If you really have a tough problem to work on, then work on it when you're tired and you walk through a messy, green, dimly lit coffee shop while drinking a scotch, wearing formal wear, and imagining yourself in Paris. You may just solve all the world's problems. So, what will work for you? I would encourage you all to try these, because obviously not all of them are going to work for everyone. But I bet you anything that at least one of these will work for all of you. So thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Will. This is very, very interesting. Lots of good studies here. I have one question here that came in that I'm going to ask, and then as folks kind of digest all this really meaty information, if you have other questions you'd like to put out, now is the time. So I'm going to give you some time with that. With this one question here. So it says, you know, looking for suggestions on team activities to stimulate creativity, ones that don't necessarily involve drinking, making a mess, and detaching, but of all the lessons you've learned here and your experience in the past, are there any in-office exercises that can take these studies into consideration that you've experienced?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, if you think about what Ideasicle is, which is my company, it is built on that fundamental belief that if you can get really smart people together and you can get them coming up with ideas and seeing each other's ideas and riffing on each other's ideas, then wonderful things will come out of that. So number one, just getting people together and you know, I hate to use the word focused, but giving them a problem that they need to solve and making that problem very clear, I think can certainly help. As far as brainstorms, I mean, physical getting together can have drawbacks that aren't always positive. You know, if you're physically together, there's always somebody who's extra loud, there's always somebody who doesn't want to talk, or there's political issues between people, and maybe they clam up or maybe over-assert themselves. So there can be some challenges with the in-person group dynamic of ideation. But one way, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about with Ideasicle is to help people do it themselves, do what I do with my experts virtually, but to bring virtual ideation into their own departments. Because there's something about the virtualness that, again, removes barriers, right? Like if you can't see each other, you can't judge each other. And if you don't judge each other, then everybody is reduced to a typeface on the screen. And when you're reduced to a typeface, then it's all about the idea, and that's what it should be. So I'm afraid I don't have any exercises for you, you know, to help stimulate creativity. I actually can't stand it when there's a brainstorm, a physical brainstorm with everybody together, and somebody does a warm-up exercise. I don't know. Maybe they work. I don't know if they do or not. But I think getting the right people. Oh, one thing I will say, and this is again a lesson learned from Ideasicle, is that don't have the same people working on the assignment all the time. And what I mean by that is you might have, you know, a writer and an art director who are working on the retail, you know, on the floor signage or something like that. Well, what if you brought in people that are a little less expected? Different perspectives, I find, can yield much better ideas. And if you think about what I've been talking about in this presentation, you know, when you're paying attention to seemingly irrelevant information, that's for an individual. But when you put individuals who all have their own universes that they can bring to each other, it can get really interesting when you've got a PR person who really doesn't know much about on-the-floor signage in a retail environment, but having that person's perspective, thinking about the project with people who are experts at it, maybe a digital person as well. This is not a digital assignment, but bringing that perspective can actually create more fodder for everyone to chomp on, as opposed to the same old fodder you get from the same two people every single time. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but there you go.
That's great. Thank you. I do not see any other questions at this time. Give you a few more minutes to ask anything you'd like as I finish up, to just say thank you. And you know, I think this is relevant for anyone on any basis, but particularly obviously with the in-house group, and common topic that we've covered has been stimulating creativity. So certainly being able to keep some of these things in mind, just simple, you know, knowledge of detaching is important, and color and mindset, and even the way you're presenting yourself can all be pieces that aid in that stimulation of creativity, I think is very helpful.
That's right.
So,
and I'm not done either. This is just a snapshot of where I am today. I'm going to continue to mine this topic because I find it fascinating, and to me it's very important. And so in 2 years, maybe we do this again, and there could be a whole host of other studies that have emerged that either support it or don't. And I'm totally open to evolving my thinking on this.
Yeah, we would love that. You know, personally, I'm curious where technology and kind of the clutter we allow ourselves to be in with all the technology we have around us kind of affects our creativity. So maybe we'll see a little more of that in a few years as well.
Yeah, good question.
Great. Well, thank you, Will, so much for doing this. And those of you that are in Boston, Will be joining us along with his in-house agency partner at Vistaprint tomorrow for our IHAF huddle in Boston. So we look forward to seeing you there, Will, and anyone else that's on the line that will be there. And for now, thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, Will.
Bye-bye.